is Eric Houston, the Executive Director of the Wolf River Conservancy, and I'm joining you tonight from Providence, Rhode Island, where Ryan Hall, our Director of Conservation, and I are attending the National Land Conservation Conference, hosted by the Land Trust Alliance. As you may know, the Wolf River Conservancy is an accredited land trust. And if you're interested in learning more about what that means, please visit our website. Well, let me welcome you all to tonight's lecture, which is part of our ongoing educational outreach to the community. We're very excited about sharing tonight's program featuring Laura Molenaar of Monarch Joint Venture. But first, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the Conservancy is hosting a Greenway Arboretum stroll, as well as a Paddle the Greenway event this Sunday, September 29th. Please, again, see our website, wolfriver.org, for RSVP and registration information. I would also like to acknowledge all of our benefactors for 2024. They are the Crawford Howard Family Foundation, TC Energy, Bank of America, AutoZone, FedEx, the Hyde Family Foundation, Buckman, International Paper, Jim Karras Subaru, Terminex, Ring Container Technologies, Brother International Corporation, First Horizon Foundation, and Silvamo. Thank you for their ongoing support. Of course, all of our supporters, corporations, individual donors, and volunteers are critically important in allowing us to deliver on our mission, the protection and enhancement of the Wolf River watershed as a sustainable natural resource. As always, gifts of any size are appreciated. Please see our website at wolfriver.org/give. And finally, a few housekeeping details. We ask that you do not attempt to record this program with any device. If you have questions during the program, please use the Q&A feature and not the chat box. Our Education Director, Kathy, will be monitoring the questions and will ask them after the program. Now, it is my pleasure to present to you our speaker for this evening. Laura Molenaar has worked with Monarch Joint Venture, formerly the University of Minnesota Monarch Lab, for many years, providing professional development to educators. She has been recognized by educational and environmental groups for her approach to engaging students in authentic science and is a recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science Teaching. She is both a Minnesota Master Naturalist and a Minnesota Master Gardener. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Laura Molenaar.
Hello, it's so wonderful to see you joining us today. I see those numbers of our participants growing each moment. I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen. Let me see. I think I clicked the wrong thing here. Just a second. So I need to go into share my screen, and course, we'll need to get into the beginning of our talk here. Thank you for your patience. There we go. So it all looks good. So today we're going to be talking about monarch butterflies and some of the unique characteristics of it and its needs and how we can help. Thank you for that nice introduction. I live in western Minnesota, right on the edge between the prairie and the lakes region. Today was just a glorious day here, and I know that many of our participants are from all over the country. So hopefully I'll be able to give you those of you that are in the western part of the country, to give you a few insights into the monarch population that is there as well. So we're gonna start with the monarch life cycle. It seems like a simplistic life cycle, but it is really complex. It's a complete metamorphosis. That means that the young is very different than the adult, looks very different. Where incomplete metamorphosis would be like a cricket, where a baby cricket looks very much like its adult, just a little smaller version. So we have here the egg of the monarch, which is shaped a little bit like a sugar drop or gumdrop. but you can see that there are lines along the edges, little channels, and between those are little openings, tiny, minute openings, so that oxygen can be transferred into that location. Then it moves to the larva form. And I just want to point out these fun little, they have 10 little legs that have suction cups on them. So that's why the monarch can, and as well as other Lepidoptera, can travel up and down and on top of things. You can find them in the most unusual places. And then they have their 6 true legs that are located under the head of this monarch. Next, it would be in its pupa form. And Lepidoptera, the moth, forms a silk covering around that pupa, and that's called a cocoon. But they all have a pupa. In a butterfly, it's called a chrysalis. So this is a chrysalis of the monarch. And you can see that it has some of the structures of the adult monarch right in that pupa, you can see. Then it becomes an adult. And this is a male monarch that's present here. And I can tell that because the monarch has little black dots here, pheromone dots, and the lines on its wings look like they're shaped with a sharp pencil or a ink pen, where the female her lines look like they were drawn with a chalk or a marker. They're much thicker and makes her look a little bit more dirty. Now, this whole cycle wouldn't be possible without the monarch host plant. So some butterflies can use multiple plants as a host for its larva, but the monarch only can use milkweed, which is pictured here. This is a young common milkweed. So the monarchs are dependent on the milkweed, and the milkweed carries within it a toxin called a cardinalide. And the monarch ingests that, and that toxin then makes the monarch unpalatable to any organism that has a backbone. So if a bird were to eat a monarch, it would make them violently sick, and then they would not eat a monarch again. So it's one way of being protected. So that they also have a milky substance. Now that milky substance isn't where that cardinalide is located. That's in the vegetation part of the plant. But that milky substance helps to protect the plant. And the monarch, in the next slide, I'll show you that the monarch has figured out how to get around that. So here we have all the stages in one slide. You wouldn't find this, we set this up. You wouldn't find this in the wild ever. So up here we have the egg, so you could see it in its size compared to all of its stages. So this is the egg. The monarch is in the egg for about 3 to 5 days. Now the whole cycle of the monarch going from egg to adult, the timing of that is dependent on the temperature. The warmer it is, the quicker it goes through each of those stages. The colder it is, the slower it is. So we kind of give this window of time. So within a scale, the monarch would go from an egg to adult, typically in about a month's time, about 25 to 30 days. So it's an egg for 3 to 5 days. And then it is a first instar for about 2 to 3 days, a second instar for about 2 to 3 days, a third instar for 2 to 3 days, a fourth instar for 2 to 3 days, and the fifth instar. And you think, well, people think by looking at this picture that we decide what stage the monarch's in by its size, but that can really vary. So the way that I know what each instar is present here is by the length of the tentacles near its head, its front tentacles. So a first instar really has none. You might see just a little nub. The second instar just starts to get these little pokey tentacles. The third instar, they look like horns. The fourth instar, they go past their nose. And the fifth star are long and dangly. So you could have a fifth instar be the same size as the third instar, but I know what it is because of the length of its tentacles. So these monarchs have one job: to eat and eat and eat. So each time it sheds its skin, it is called, that change or molt is called an instar. So when they first shed their skin is all bunched up inside on their outside, kind of like putting a new pair of footy pajamas on a toddler. Excuse me. And as they grow, they just stretch that skin out until they just can't grow anymore. And that gives them the sign that it's time to shed that skin. And they always will turn around and eat the skin again because it has nutrients that they need. And then they'll continue into that next stage. I want to point out this little first instar and what it's doing to keep from ingesting some of that latex that's sticky like peanut butter. So this monarch has eaten just the vegetation in between the veins. So it is creating little holes in the middle of the veins and not tackling the vein itself where that latex is going to flow. As they get larger, they'll snip the vein, and then they'll just snip this vein and stop the flow of the latex. At the fifth instar, they will cut it at the petiole and then eat the leaf after it has stopped the flow of the latex. This first instar has a little bit different coloration. That's because the monarch does not get its iconic black and yellow and white stripes until it has ingested milkweed. So this fifth instar that we have here has all the characteristics and all the structures that it needs to be in an adult. It has reproductive organs. They aren't fully developed yet. It has the buds of its wings. And inside here it has antennae. So a caterpillar has antennae, but they're little structures near their mouth. But when they go into the adult, then they have those long antennae with the little knobs on them that you see in an adult. So it grows and it grows and grows until it feels like it's totally filled out that skin. And then the monarch gets the urge to move off the milkweed plant, and then it's time for that next transition. And that monarchs have a little spinneret just below their mouth. And so this monarch will move to a leaf, and using that spinneret, it will create a silk pad, and it will grab a hold of that little silk pad with its hind legs, and it will hang there, typically overnight. And then you will begin to notice a little bulging around its head, and the skin will begin to shed like it does in this picture. And it wiggles and wiggles and wiggles. You can see those wing buds, and it's hanging onto that silk pad with its last set of prolegs. And then it wiggles and wiggles and wiggles. And inside of it, there is a little stalk called a cremaster. And that cremaster is full of little hooks like Velcro. And that cremaster comes out from inside under the skin pops off, and then that monarch pushes that cremaster into the silk. You can see that here where it's hanging onto it. Now the outside of this green worm looking thing is moist. It has a cuticle layer that is not hardened yet. And that cuticle layer will, as the monarch wiggles and wiggles and gets as compact as it possibly can, then that cuticle layer will harden, and we'll see this structure that we're familiar with. That is the pupa of the monarch butterfly. And it has this beautiful gold trim and gold dots. All of the monarchs, or all the butterflies that are in the Danaus family, have some type of a metallic reflecting material on their pupa. We've had students do research to try to understand what is the purpose of that. And the conclusions that have been drawn over the years is that it is helpful in reflecting light to help them to be camouflaged. You won't typically find a pupa on the milkweed because typically the monarchs will move off of a milkweed plant. I found them on daylilies and in my hydrangeas, and on my garden hose one time. And in my classroom, I found one had climbed inside a bear skull and had made its pupa inside the mouth of a bear skull. It was a pretty cool observation for all of our students. Then it will be in that pupa for about 10 to 15 days, depending on how warm it is. And then just before it's ready to emerge, you'll notice that the pupa will turn gray. And then you'll begin to see the black and orange coloration. Those scales form last, and within the 24 hours or the evening before it's ready to emerge. Then that monarch will fill that little package with air and pop itself out of that pupa case with its head hanging down, and that its wings are tiny when it emerges, and its abdomen is very large. That abdomen is full of hemolymph or monarch blood. And then the monarch has to hang and pump that fluid into its wings to kind of inflate the wings. This is a really dangerous time for the monarchs, because if they get knocked off or bumped and their wings get misshapen, they will always be misshapen and they won't be able to fly or successfully migrate. So when the monarchs have emerged and we have our last population of the summer, which we have now, I'm still seeing monarchs flying here. But about the mid-August, the monarchs are that emerge after the mid-August emerge without being fully developed as reproductively. They are going to be like perpetual adolescents for the next 9 months. So we have this population. I'm going to see if I can hide my thumbnail there. We have this summer population that it's made its way all the way to Canada. And in early August, those monarchs begin to move south. Now, it might seem like they're moving together, but they're not really. They just all have the same need, and they're riding on the very same trade winds. So they will, in the evening, will come out of those winds and look for a place where they can spend the night, because the monarchs can't be on the move in the dark. And they're looking for a specific type of humidity or a tree that will protect them from the wind and the elements. And you'll begin to see fall roosts. And this is a roost that was just around the corner from my house. And then they will spend the day nectaring, looking for food sources, because as they migrate, they have to add fats and lipids to their system. Most of them will arrive in Mexico heavier than they were when they left where they were reared. So they're looking for those fall flowers that are in bloom. That's why it's so important to remember the fall blooming plants like zinnias and the liatris and sunflowers, the late sunflowers that are coneflowers and things that are great nectarine plants for monarchs. Their favorite is this purple flower called liatris. They love that. So all the monarchs from the east travel into this funnel-like shape, all of them that are east of the Rocky Mountains, and they all travel to this area that covers about 50 square miles, about 100 kilometers square, is where they will spend their winter. Now, for those of you that live in the West, the monarchs have spent their summer in the Sierra Madre Mountains, and they are all moving to the coastal zones of California. And that's where they will spend their winter. And so this wide range of area of sources of the monarchs is not like they all move at the same time. So in early August, I'm seeing in Minnesota monarchs clustering. Well, those are the monarchs that were in Canada. And then as the monarchs here emerge, then they begin to move in that same direction as those Canadian butterflies. So the roosts get larger and larger the farther you go south. This is a little map of that area in Mexico. It's about 50 miles out of Mexico City. And I've had the fortunate experience of visiting there twice. And all the gray spots here are the areas that are the overwintering sites that are protected. They've been decreed as areas that were protected in 1986. The other areas are also places where the monarchs will roost, but not as consistently. So each of these spaces could include, there's about 5 to 15 overwintering sites each year. It could be just a few trees, or it could be many hectares. So the overwintering generation, the ones that are leaving your area now, are going to live up to 9 months, where the monarchs that had spent the summer only lived 3 to 4 weeks. They start laying eggs as soon as they emerge as an adult. And once a monarch starts laying eggs, it's the end of his life is already determined. But these monarchs haven't developed reproductively. It's called diapause. So they are going to just hang out for the next 9 months. They cover the trees in big bunches. You can see these big bunches here, and that are about the size of an adult torso. And there's monarchs up and down all of the branches or the trunks of the trees, and they just hang out. There'd be so many monarchs on one branch that it's just like putting a heavy ornament on a Christmas tree. And they just droop way down to all the way to the trunk. It's where they'll just hang out from about November to the beginning of January, mid-January. They'll just stay there. Now, when the monarchs fly into Mexico, into those villages near those sanctuaries, the native people there, believe that they are carrying the spirits of their loved ones. And that's the part of the celebration of the Day of the Dead. So the monarchs are very entwined into the native culture of the areas where the monarch sanctuaries are located. Now, in the winter, about January, they do a count of how many monarchs are in the overwintering sites. They don't count each monarch individually. I'm going to back up a minute. They have, at one time, we had bagged a cluster of monarchs, counted them to find an estimate of how many monarchs would be located or would be counted about in a torso of an adult. And then they count how many trees and how many of those clusters are on each tree, how many trees in a hectare that are occupied by monarchs, and they do this magical math to decide what the population size would be. And what we have here is the numbers represent up here how many hectares of trees covered in monarchs there were. So I started monitoring. They started doing this count in 1993-94. My first year of being a monitor was 1996-97 with students, and we would find sometimes 2 or 3 monarchs on a plant. It was a great year to monitor. There were so many monarchs, and we have not had a summer of monitoring like that since. The summer that we monitored, 2013, we found not a single monarch all summer long. And that was important data for us to collect. I had been to the sanctuaries in 2021 or 2021-01, and there had been a severe storm there. It rained and rained and rained, and then it turned cold and froze. Monarchs can be wet and monarchs can be cold, but monarchs can't be wet and cold. So many monarchs fell from the trees because they had frozen. And monarchs can recover from that, but there were so many monarchs, they were knee deep in the forest, that some of the monarchs on the top could recover, but the ones that were underneath were killed from the weight of the other monarchs. But then it bounced back up the next year. We're realizing that we need to have to sustain the population about 6 hectares of trees covered with monarchs that are overwintering. And you could see that in the last 10, 11, 12, quite a few years, we've only had 1 year that reached that goal. So the trend is that we are seeing less monarchs in the overwintering site. There's a couple different variables that are part of that. Some of them happening in the overwintering site with logging in the Ormeal fir forest. So all the monarchs are hanging out in this tree called an Ormeal fir. In some of the sanctuaries, they'll hang out even on other kinds of trees. They moved to Mexico because they want to get out of the freezer of North America and move to the refrigerator of Mexico. In those high mountains, that transvolcanic mountain range, they move high up into the elevation, they're 6,000 feet or higher, where it's dry and cool. And that helps to protect them. It keeps them from using up those fats that were stored, and they just hang out. And then that becomes the perfect environment for them. But we'll talk a little bit about why we're seeing these numbers drop. So about January, the monarchs will begin to become active. They'll start flying around. They're looking for something to eat. They're beginning to mate. The monarchs will mate multiple times, the female will. And research is now showing there's a trend that the females are mating with the males that are smaller and weaker, and then they will mate multiple times. But the first males that are successful are typically these smaller, less virile males. And the female receives from that male a small package called a spermatophore. That spermatophore is made up of lipids and proteins and sperm, and that does not fertilize her eggs. That's that sperm that's present. She absorbs that into her body and uses those lipids and that protein to help her to become able to make her journey north. So she'll mate multiple times, take advantage of that package that is gifted to her from that male monarch, and then when it's about time to make that migration, the more virile males are the ones who mate a little bit later. Then her eggs will be fertilized and she'll be ready to make that journey north. Not many males make the journey north or get very far because they have also mated multiple times, and each time they mate, they're giving up more of their lipids and more of their body stores in order to guarantee that their DNA is transferred into the next generation. So the monarchs are finding there's some asters and some goldenrod that are blooming in the mountains, and they're also nectaring. They're taking a drink that's called puddling in some of the streams. By this time of the year, it's been a dry winter, and they are taking advantage of all that nectar that is going to help them on their journey. Now, the journey north is not one population trip like the journey that they had made in the fall. In the fall, they traveled that 3,000 miles to Mexico. The organism that emerged in Canada is the organism that makes it all the way to Mexico. But it's different in the spring. In the spring, the monarchs that they've mated now, they're leaving the sanctuary, and they are heading north. And as soon as they find milkweed, they begin laying eggs. And they can find milkweed as small as this and take advantage of it and lay the eggs on that milkweed. And once they've mated, as I'd mentioned, they'll live about 3 to 4 weeks. So they will begin that journey north and laying eggs all the way. So let's say they've taken 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get this far, then they die. They have given all they can, and they've at the end of their life. But at that time, then their first set of eggs that were laid along the southern border of Texas are now adults, because they are now almost 4 weeks old, and that is the population that moves into Tennessee and into Iowa and Minnesota. We'll see them appear about Mother's Day, early May. By the time they reach Minnesota, they are, there's not very many of them because they have been laying eggs all along the way too. So those monarchs that spent the winter in Mexico might look like this by the time they're done laying those last eggs, or by the time they make it to Minnesota. They've been traveling quite a long time. And then when you see a monarch that looks fresh and totally intact, then you know that that's a newer monarch that's emerged. If you see one of those that looks tattered and worn, then you know that that monarch came all the way from southern Texas to make it to your location. And won't be long that its first offspring will be joining it wherever you are. So the monarchs in California move from the coast, and the first generation is just on the edge of the Sierra Madre, and their offspring make it into the higher ranges of the mountains where they spend their summer. So from March to, well, I'll say this, get this generations right. So March to April, this green color is, we would call our first generation of monarchs. Our second and third generation, depending on how warm it is and what the conditions are, we can get 3 generations in a summer, like I believe we did this year. And that third generation will be the generation that lays the eggs in early August, late July. And then it's their offspring that are the ones that are going to make that migration south, that 4th generation or 5th generation. So multiple generations. What's so amazing when you think about that migration south, none of them have ever been there to Mexico. Like birds, kind of the older birds show the younger birds the way. But it's believed that the angle of the sun has a role in helping to direct those monarchs to that very small area in Mexico. And the mountains also cut across the state of Mexico at that elbow. They kind of go crossways. So it's also kind of a barrier to help the monarchs know you've arrived. Now, there are some challenges that monarchs have. And one of the challenges some of the challenges are human-driven threats. So habitat loss, we think back to that graph when we saw that the monarch population stayed below that 6 hectares each year. And some of that is because of agricultural practices have changed. With the introduction of Roundup Ready crops, the presence of milkweed in the farm fields is no more. Monarchs utilized the milkweed that was in agricultural fields heavily. Milkweed loves to be disturbed. So you think about cultivating and how cultivation would work up those roots and spur the growth of milkweed, and the monarchs utilized that. And then as we moved into Roundup Ready crops, then the milkweed is no longer there. So it's so encouraging to see businesses and homes that have milkweed popping up here and there in places where it wasn't intended to be, and they're letting it be there. We can make a difference by allowing that milkweed to grow in those spots. Another human-driven threat is climate change. Climate change has impacted this migration and the milkweed, and we don't know the total extent of what that is going to be. But there is research going on with the presence of the milkweed when the monarchs are migrating. Is there going to be a disconnect? Already we see that some of the milkweed has not emerged yet, because in some areas of North America it's colder and wetter, and some areas it's warmer and drier, or colder and drier, that it's changed, and we just don't know what that is going to look like in the future. But we're beginning to see a disconnect or some missing factors for those monarchs, or it's become drier and hotter, and those nectaring plants are no longer available when the monarchs are migrating through. So some of that, it's impacting some of that fall migration and the ability of those monarchs to store those lipids that they need to make it through the winter. A third one that I don't have on here, but I will mention, is the conundrum of how do we deal with mosquitoes? You know, mosquitoes carry disease. Seems like new diseases are being discovered that are transmitted by mosquitoes. And, you know, we have to come up with a balancing act of how do we deal with this organism that is problematic without causing more problems for other organisms. The typical way that mosquitoes are dealt with is using an adulticide. That's a spray that is targeting the adult mosquitoes. And typically that chemical is permethrin. And permethrin is not target specific. I'm not an expert on this. We had a student in the lab that was doing a controlled experiment with this and found that permethrin will stay present and will be toxic to monarch caterpillars for 21 days after it's been applied. So Canada and the United Kingdom and Europe they have limitations on the use of permethrin because of its toxicity to bees and insects, aquatic organisms, and birds. So there's, you know, a discussion talking about how do we best treat and take care of the problem of the mosquitoes without having an impact on other organisms. There is a process called a larvicide, which is target specific to mosquitoes. It's an oily mineral oil film that's applied to the areas where the mosquitoes breed. And, you know, mosquitoes have this little structure that they have to stick it out of the water in order to breathe. This mineral oil film prevents them from being able to do that. It doesn't seem to affect the other aquatic organisms, but it does kill the mosquito larva. So I know that there's some looks at doing more larval side. So that's something to ask questions about in your area. How are they dealing with this mosquito problem? And, you know, it's something we have to deal with. But as we're learning more and more, there might be ways that we can deal with it that isn't going to create such a negative impact on other populations. Other threats are natural threats. Monarchs have predators. In the overwintering sites, there's this black-headed oriole, and there's a black-backed grosbeak, and a black-eared mouse. They all have black in the name. That's how I remember them. And the oriole has learned to just slice open the abdomen of the monarch and eat the inside. The older the monarch gets, that poison that it's sequestering, that cardinalide, moves out to the wings, and it's in the cuticle of the monarch's body. So the oriole has learned that I won't get sick if I just eat the inside and don't eat the outer wrapping. The grosbeak just eats the abdomen, and the mouse eats the whole thorax and abdomen, but leaves the wings. So I've been in the sanctuaries twice, and you'll see under some trees, there'll be just this pile of wings. Then you know there's been a mouse at work. And then there's other parasitoids. This one here that we see on the egg that makes the egg look a little dirty. And then the slide below it, the picture below it, is examples of Oviocystis electroscara. That's a protozoan that infects monarchs. And we can see just that makes it look a little bit dirty. The protozoan is so small that you almost need a microscope to be able to spot them. So then you know that that egg is highly infected to be able to spot it there. There's also parasitoids. So this monarch larva had been utilized by a tachinid fly. These are the larvae of the tachinid fly. It lays its eggs on the larva, and then the larvae grow inside the monarch caterpillar, eating everything but the vital organs until the very end, when that larva is ready to go into its J stage, or into its pupa, and then they emerge. There's also a wasp that will do that as well, and that wasp will emerge when the monarch has formed its pupa. So how can we help with the things that we can make a difference in? We can create habitat, provide nectar sources, and provide milkweed. There are plans that you can find that help you to know what plants to plant when, so that you can be guaranteed to have blooming flowers throughout the whole season. You don't have to have a big prairie. These are pictures that were taken at our school prairie. You can make a difference by having a pot of flowers, even on your doorstep or on your deck or in front of your home, or what we call little pocket prairies, where you can create a pocket prairie just in the corner, the edge of your yard. It's so encouraging to see the road strips in Minneapolis. So many of them are covered with pollinator plants and milkweed that people have planted in that area where it seems like nothing else will grow. But these native plants are so resilient that they thrive there. So it's a win-win. You get that beautiful color throughout the season, and you're helping the pollinators and the monarchs. There are over 130 species of milkweed in North America. Now, the genus Asclepias is where the milkweed fits. It's in the dogbane family. Now, all milkweed are in the dogbane family, but not all dogbane are milkweed. Some people have tried to feed dogbane plants to their monarchs and have found that was not successful. So we know that monarchs will not eat dogbane, but they have to have milkweed. It's a perennial. Most of them have a milky sap. Not all of them do. Swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, does not have a lot of latex. They have a complex flower, and they have these structures called hoods and horns. And you can see in this picture here, the horn is kind of in the center, and the hood surrounds that area where the nectar is located. It really protects that nectar from organisms that want to steal it from the milkweed plant. I've seen a bee have their foot caught in there and they can't get out. So just organisms that would be successful at pollinating are the ones that the milkweed have been evolved to match. So I think about the little hood structure that is on the top of this umbel. Then the little skirt, which always reminds me of the little dancers in the Nutcracker, those little tea flowers. And so I always think about that little skirt, that little ballet skirt. And this is just an example of some of that milkweed that's oozing out of a common milkweed plant. And then all milkweed are good nectar sources for monarchs, as well as a number of other organisms. They all have their seeds dispersed by the wind. These seeds have these silk bits that they float around on. And I remember reading a story with my students where the children were encouraged to collect the pods during World War II. And that silk was used for the war effort. They used it to make life jackets. So that silk has had many, many uses throughout the years. And if you want to know more about different varieties of milkweed that will grow in your area, in Minnesota, we have 11 to 13 milkweeds to choose from. If you check out the Xerxes Society, their website is located here on the slide, and they can help you to match your area with the milkweeds that are native to that area. Another way that you can help is you can become a monarch community scientist. So community science is science that is where data is collected by everyday people like us. We're not doing it as our job. We're just doing it because we have passion for it. And we have found that community science has made a huge impact in what we know about monarchs. So why should we monitor monarchs? The data created and collected by community scientists help to answer just a huge number of questions that couldn't even be considered in traditional research methods. So there's only so much that a scientist can do. They're in a certain location, and we bring out this whole army of community scientists that are spread across North America, collecting data and having a way for that data to be submitted. And then those broad questions can be answered. We've had so many things that we thought for sure get changed because of data collected by community scientists. The value to our research and understanding is phenomenal. And if we notice trends in the monarch population, it's an ecosystem indicator. We use monarchs because they're iconic, they're easily recognized. You know you can find them on milkweed. But if things are going well for the monarchs, then it's going well for other organisms. If they're struggling, then other organisms are struggling. So there are a lot of monarch programs out there, and it's just deciding which one's right for you. What do you want to invest, or how do you want to become engaged? So you think about, how much time do I have? Where will I be? I know some people are snowbirds and they're in the south in the winter time, and they want to be somebody that maybe is collecting data all year round, or you just want to do it in the summer. How much time do you want to just go out once and collect data, or do you want to collect data weekly? Where are you located in North America? And what are your interests? What engages you, and your physical abilities as well. So there's 5 community science programs that I'm just going to highlight. 3 of them are ones that are directly related to monarchs, where the others have some more generalist observations you can make as well as monarch. The first one is Project Monarch Health. Project Monarch Health is tracking the presence of oviocystic electrosclera, OE, which is that protozoan parasite that I showed you in that previous slide. Here's a picture of the scales of monarch butterfly, and you can see those little football spores hidden in between those scales. So volunteers sample wild monarchs. You get to go out, catch some monarchs, and then you test them. It's not very technical. You just take a little piece of tape, touch it to the abdomen, put it onto a card, as you can see in this first picture, and then you mail that to Project Monarch Health. It helps us to understand how many monarchs have OE, and where are those monarchs that have OE. And also we're looking at, do those monarchs become migrators, successfully migrate? Things that we found because of the data collected by community scientists is we're finding that there are high levels of OE infection in the monarch population that breeds on non-native milkweed in the southern United States. Many people plant milkweed called tropical milkweed, Asclepias curassavica, and that milkweed does not die back in the fall. It stays present all winter long, and it's been encouraging monarchs to not complete their migration. It's been encouraging them to continue to stay in those warm regions of the United States. We're also finding that higher disease is prevalent in those monarchs that don't migrate. And they're finding that there is a link between the monarchs that are breeding all summer, all winter long, their use of non-native milkweed, and higher rates of OE. So this has led us into looking more closely at Asclepias curassavica and making recommendations towards the use of that plant. I'm not saying don't ever plant it, but if you do plant it, you need to cut it back at the end of the fall season so that those monarchs won't be encouraged to stay put in those regions of the United States that don't have a hard freeze. We don't have to worry about it here in Minnesota. If I plant tropical milkweed, it's going to die. and it won't come back up next year unless I replant it. So depending on where you're located in North America can determine how you would manage that tropical milkweed. Another program is the Monarch Watch, which is a tagging program. You also get to go out and catch wild butterflies, and you can acquire tags from Monarch Watch, which is from the University of Kansas, monarchwatch.org. And it involves putting a tiny little sticker on their hind wing, right where the little mitten is of the wing, and it has an ID number. And you then submit the number, and if the monarch was a male or a female, and let them go. And at the end of the season, you can find a report and find out if your monarch had been found in Mexico. My class tagged every year, and we did have 2 monarchs found in Mexico. It's pretty exciting to have that happen. And this is helping us to understand the migratory routes and the behaviors of monarchs in migration. And they have found that monarchs, the bulk of the monarchs migrate when the sun is at a 53-degree angle to a 47-degree angle. So there's this window of about a week when the bulk of the monarchs are migrating through Texas into the overwintering grounds. And they are the most successful. That doesn't mean monarchs aren't leaving earlier or that monarchs aren't migrating later, but they're finding that the most successful migrators are those that are during that window. Another project that takes a little longer commitment is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And that takes once a week going out and looking at milkweed plants and finding the evidence of monarchs on the milkweed plants, counting eggs, counting larvae, reporting that. You can also rear monarchs with this program and report if the monarchs have been parasitized by those wasps or those flies. You also can collect data on the condition of milkweed, and that way helps us understand if the condition of the milkweed impacts the monarch's use. So you monitor a site weekly. You have a determined number of milkweed plants. You can monitor if you only have 10 plants or 5 plants. I have more than 100 plants, but I never monitor all of them. I usually do between 25 and 50 plants each week. It takes me about a half an hour to collect the data, and then to put the data in takes a few minutes. This is all of these programs have an internet site where you can do your reporting. Now, if you want to do a one-time observation, you just notice this late monarch still in your garden, late October, and you're thinking, oh, what's going on? You can report that as well, and other observations of other organisms. And the 2 sites that I'm going to highlight for community science is iNaturalist and Journey North. Now, iNaturalist is a app-based program where you can report any organism, fungus, birds, trees, flowers, spiders, and that is a crowdsourced site. You upload photos either within the site or from your photo roll, and you submit it. It will help you to identify them. And then other scientists or other community scientists will look at your observations and will affirm or give suggestions for identification. So this is really, really fun. And if you're someone who really geeks out on this stuff, you can become an identifier. You don't have to get a master's degree in entomology to do it. You can share your expertise to help others understand the organisms that you're familiar with. The other one is Journey North, and Journey North also covers multiple organisms. And you can do milkweed when the milkweed first emerges, your first egg, your first monarch, when you begin to see the monarchs roosting. But it also, you can add data here about hummingbirds, orioles, robins. When your lake ice is out or when it freezes over, the leaf out, sunlight data, when the sun rises and when it sets. And it has these wonderful maps that are, they are, I wouldn't say live, but you can see each week the different color of the dots appearing as that migration is taking place. I use Journey North to help me know when it's time to put my hummingbird feeders out in the spring. This is a great site, journeynorth.org. Check it out and see how you can get involved with Journey North. It can be just 10 minutes here or there. Once you've registered, it's very easy to report your data. And iNaturalist and Journey North are helping us to understand how all those organisms are connected. So what have we learned because of community science? We've learned about the natural history, about how monarchs are distributed across North America and in their migration route, their migratory pathways, when they migrate, what they nectar on the most, which milkweed they prefer. We're looking at the parasitoids and understanding more about those and about disease. The immature survival rates, monarch may lay 500 eggs in the wild, and only 5% of those eggs ever make it to their adult stage. And we're not sure how many of those survive to reproduce. And we're learning more about the impacts and the threats and the stressors to monarchs and how we can make decisions to help reduce some of those stresses. The data collected by community scientists help us understand how to help conserve monarchs. In the past, 2/3 of the field-based research papers on monarchs have utilized data collected by people just like you and me. Other reasons to monitor monarchs, I like to start at the bottom. It's fun. It really is fun. And when you discover something you've never seen before, because there's a lot going on in the milkweed community, it is just really an energizer. So monarchs, because their population is declining, monitoring is an important tool because it gives feet on the ground data to help scientists to answer the questions that are being asked by the groups that are making decisions about how our land is managed and how it is used. All ages can get involved in community science. Small children can tag monarchs, and small children, they love to catch the monarchs. And getting a young student or a young child, your grandchildren, your neighbors involved will help to grow new conservationists for the next generation. And those of us that are way past that age, it also keeps us outside and engaged with our environment. This picture here, I love to show. I just have to say, this is my son. He was about 8 years old, and he is now a doctor. But he all got started in his love of science by looking at monarchs. So I love to point him out. It makes me smile. So that's the end of what I have to share. I tell you, I could have talked for hours, but I tried to stick to some specific points. So there is time now for you to have your questions get answered.
Okay, thank you, Laura. That was just wonderful. What a wonderful overview of what's going on with monarchs. It was exactly what I hoped you would do. Here is our first question, which is, are monarchs currently on the endangered species list?
Monarchs are not currently on the endangered species list. They at one point were on the watch list, and some of that has changed. There was an appeal to the association that makes that decision here a year ago, because there's some question that is the monarch population endangered, or is it the monarchs that migrate that are in trouble? So some of that has to get kind of weeded out, and we expect that a decision will be made this year about if they will be added to the endangered list or be added back to the watch list. There's two different associations to do that, and we're watching the federal government's decision. They're the ones who make that decision if it's endangered or not.
Right. Okay. And while perhaps some other folks are thinking about questions they might want to ask, I have a couple. I have common milkweed planted in my yard and some swamp milkweed. I've noticed that most of my monarchs lay on the common milkweed, in my case. But my question is, they also seem to prefer younger plants to the older milkweed plants. And should I be regularly cutting back my milkweed plants so I have more young plants coming up?
Well, that's really, really interesting because there's a group at the University of Michigan that had a project a couple summers ago that asked us to do just what you suggested, to cut back milkweed or pull the milkweed and leave some of the milkweed. So a third of my milkweed I pulled around the 4th of July, and a third of the milkweed I cut, and the other third I left alone. And I have found that pulling the milkweed produces young plants faster than cutting them. When you cut them, then you'll get two little stalks that will come off of that spot where it was cut. And sometimes they're not as sturdy, but when you pull the milkweed, then yes, it does create a really nice, young, tender plant that I'm assuming a monarch would be thrilled to find in the early weeks of August. So yes, you can do that. And I sometimes will do that. We have some problems with a non-native aphid, and sometimes the plants get so infested with the aphids that I will pull a number of those plants so that the monarchs don't have to compete with. The aphids don't bother the monarchs, but they cause the milkweed plant sometimes to become kind of black and icky looking because of the honeydew. And then there's more ants present when there's aphids present, and the ants aren't really out to eat the monarchs, but they're protecting the aphids. So sometimes they will, do a monarch in, they'll attack a monarch and to chase it off the plant and, will kill it. So it's a good suggestion. I mean, it's a good practice to freshen up part of your milkweed, of course, not all of it at the same time. It's interesting, in the lab, we've done experiments, and the monarchs prefer the Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed in the lab, but after observing monarchs for a long time in the field, I rarely find them on the swamp milkweed. It's almost always on the common milkweed. I won't say always, but there's also a little milkweed called world milkweed that has these tiny little spiky leaves, and I found monarchs on them too. So
that's so interesting. Yeah. I wonder what I wonder what they're looking for in particular milkweed plants. Okay, here is another question.
That's a really good question. That would make a great research project.
Yeah, it would. So, do the size of the caterpillars get smaller as fall moves forward? The ones in the garden are much smaller than a few weeks ago.
Well, that's a really good question. So you think about as milkweed senesces, and once they've bloomed and they are creating their seed pods, all of their energy is going into that reproductive stage of the plant, into the seed. So, this is just, I haven't done research on this, but I also believe that milkweed has less nutrition value here later in the season. There's also, colder evenings. That might be part of it. I just had a small caterpillar pupate. I was so surprised that it went into its pupa, created a beautiful adult, but it was smaller. And so it doesn't seem to affect their ability to complete their cycle. So it's just I've always thought that it had something to do with what's going on with the milkweed.
Interesting. Okay, and so I have another question, and this is about overwintering monarchs. I've been really concerned about stories I've read about logging down there, illegal logging, and some terrible acts against conservationists trying to protect the butterflies. And so I'm wondering, since the trees seem to be valued by illegal loggers, I'm wondering if anyone's doing any experiments on getting say if the monarchs would shelter on some other structure, like if we could provide does it have to be an OUML tree, or is it just the microclimate in that area that they need?
Well, last year I visited the Sierra Plone Sanctuary and El Rosario. El Rosario is almost all OUML fir trees, where Sierra Plone is a mixed forest. And I saw just as many of the monarchs on deciduous trees as I did on coniferous trees. So monarchs will utilize other trees. You know, that western population in California, initially they used the Monterey pine, which then had been harvested, and now they're taking advantage of eucalyptus. So we know that they will use trees that are not the OUML fir trees. The problem with the logging that's taken place in the sanctuaries, and one of the reasons why there was such an impact on that, with that storm that happened in 2001, was because the forest created a canopy that was like a blanket, a solid, warm, cozy quilt. And as they removed the trees within the forest, now it's become like a crocheted blanket. And we all know if we're chilly, we want that solid quilt versus that crocheted blanket that grandma made. And so there's you know, that impact on the population is a definite, that their ability to survive those weather events. There are now, yes, no doubt that there have been illegal actions going on. At Sierra Plone, the community there's a group called Butterflies and Their People. And what they do is they utilize the income that is brought in from the tourist trade to help to hire the people that live there locally to provide them a way of income so that they wouldn't be dependent on the logging of the forest. And then they become the protectors of the monarchs in the forest. And that seems to be a really wonderful, having wonderful results. The people of the mountainous areas, the native people that live there, they love the monarchs. They love the forest. But the forest has been so intertwined in how they meet their needs. You know, most of them use their cooking is done with wood, and they're dependent on harvesting wood in order to keep their fires. So some groups have helped to supplement incomes to provide them with efficient stoves so that not as much wood is needed, and then also finding ways for them to make a living that isn't dependent on the trees, but is more dependent on protecting the trees and protecting the sanctuaries. Seems to be a very, very effective plan. So you could look up Butterflies and Their People online, and they have a presence where you could see what's going on at Sierra Plone.
So I'm sure that a lot of people have not been already to see the migratory butterflies down in Mexico. So we're a person to go. What would you recommend as far as the most responsible way for responsible companies or organizations to arrange a tour of the area that would help the local population?
Well, Monarch Joint Venture is planning a second trip to Mexico this year, and they utilize people from the World Wildlife Association, WWF, I think it's a federation. And they are leading a trip so that you can travel with a group, and that provides a great opportunity for education because you're traveling with local people that are educators and also people from North America that are educators. There will be somebody there from Monarch Joint Venture, as well as people that are part of Monarch Joint Venture in Mexico and with the World Wildlife Fund that are working to protect and understand the monarch butterflies. The last trip I went, I didn't go with the group. I went with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we went to the Butterfly B&B at Sarah Palone. They're the ones who manage that program, the butterflies and their people. And they are the ones who took us to El Rosario and Sierra Chincua and to Sarah Palone. And then we were being educated by people that live in Sarah Palone, that they have an Airbnb there that is in the Sarah Palone Sanctuary. And you ride horse up to see where the butterflies are roosting, and then they will take you by van to the other sanctuaries on other days if you would like to do that.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm going to remember, I'm going to write that down and remember it. And that is it. So, Laura, for our questions tonight, thank you so much. This was really wonderful. And I may be contacting you later on with questions. Who knows?
Please do. Or to Katie Lynn. The monarchjointventure.org, you can look there to see more information about monarchs. That website is full of pamphlets that talk about gardening for monarchs. It talks about conservation efforts. It talks about when you should mow. There's a pamphlet on mowing for the monarchs, road ditch mowing, and as well as information about their life cycle, about rearing them. So check out our Monarch Joint Venture website. There are many, many courses, short courses you can take to learn more about monarchs. And there's a long course that is like a 20-hour long course where you could really dive deep into monarchs. And then they have little webinars, at lunchtime every month that you can also learn more about what's going on in the monarch population right now.
That sounds great. I'm going to check that out for sure. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to wrap us up. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And Laura, thank you so much for your time and all of this incredible information. Again, folks, please check out Monarch Joint Venture on the internet. And remember, we are hosting an Arboretum stroll this Sunday, the 29th, out east, as well as a Paddle the Greenway event at our Epping Way location. Again, that's this Sunday, the 29th. And you can check our website, wolfriver.org, in the calendar section for all the information for registration and RSVPs. But Lauren, thank you again so much.
Thank you for giving me the chance to be here.
Yeah. And everybody have a wonderful night. And thanks for joining us here at the Wolf River Conservancy.
Thank you. Bye, Laura.